Welcome from Stockholm to the next in the series of global panel discussions from TR2050 on the future of reward. My name is Ben Shenoy, and I'm a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, and I've been hosting these discussions. In this series, we've been discussing how we value and compensate our workforces in the years ahead. This topic is central to TR2050, a global initiative convening experts in reward from across the world to explore how reward can adapt to the future world of work. TR2050's mission is to chart a course to respond to evolving expectations of current and future workforces. So far in this series, we've held panel discussions in Zurich, London, and Dubai. And later this year, we'll be in Boston. But today, we're in Stockholm, in the head offices of Essity. We convened our first panel discussion back in April 2023 in Zurich. And that discussion explored pivotal issues concerning the future reward and potential challenges to how we transform the practice of reward. We're now back in Europe, in Stockholm, as I said, in June 2024. So we want to look back on our discussion in Zurich to gauge what has changed in the last 14 months. It is my pleasure to welcome our panelists today, some of whom actually took part in our Zurich panel. First of all, we've got Uwe Kilian. Uwe is Vice President of Compensation, Benefits, Performance and Labour Relations at Essity, and is our host today. Thank you, Uwe, for hosting us.
My pleasure.
Next, we've got Rainer Soder, a Senior Director of Total Rewards at Colgate-Palmolive. Then we've got Fermin Diez, a Total Rewards expert and adjunct professor at the National University of Singapore. And finally, we've got Max Paping, another Total Rewards expert and another advisor to TR2050. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining this panel. As I said, we're going to start by looking back at Zurich 14 months ago. We covered a lot of ground in that panel discussion, and we explored a lot of what's driving change in reward, where it might be headed, and what are the barriers to change. So I wanted to start by asking you, what's happened since Zurich? Fermin, do you want to start us off? Because you were there in that discussion.
I think what's happened since Europe is the message is getting out that we need to change compensation. I was recently at a global conference on rewards where we had a chance to not just meet but talk to rewards practitioners about the types of things that we're doing here. And some of the themes are coming loud and clear. I think the notion of pay transparency is gaining some traction. I think the notion that we need to do something that maybe works better than merit pay, it's an area that people are feeling uncomfortable about, and it's something that needs to be looked at. And partly it has to do with legislation all over the world.
Yes.
So we are seeing that taking hold. But perhaps some things that we still have as important tenets of the work that we're doing here at TR2050 are slow in taking off. And
Right.
I will highlight the idea of personalisation of pay,
Yeah.
where that apparently is sort of perhaps more enthusiasm back in Zurich than I'm sensing this year.
Interesting.
Both at the global conference as well as in the conversations we've been having.
So different themes at different speeds.
Yes, different themes at different speeds.
We'll come back to this point, especially about personalization.
Yeah.
Max, you're also there in Zurich. So what are your reflections since that discussion?
Well, Zurich was a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think when we came back, we were all bubbly as in, okay, now we're going to change things. Now things are going to happen, and now we're going to pick things up and make big changes. I think reality is that it's slower than what we sort of anticipate. I think that you can't say nothing has happened. There's definitely, like Fermin says, a lot of things going on. Over the past couple of months, I've had quite a lot of conversations with peers in these comp and ben positions and with consultants, and you definitely see that the market is also looking at, for example, topics like in Europe, pay transparency.
Yes.
And that is taking us a little bit away from the big policy changing things that we sort of build on here. And it's things that we have to attend to. Typically the comp and ben teams are small. There is regular work like comp rounds. So we're all sort of dug in for a period of time during the year for those kind of things. And you'll see that these additional things like upcoming legislation takes us away from the bigger things we may want to change. And that makes it difficult. That said, they are very important to keep on focusing on the future and the future of pay and how the future of work is changing pay and preferences. So we'll see what it brings further.
Great. Thank you, both of you. As you're talking, I'm reflecting on, I think it was Bill Gates who said, we tend to overestimate change in the short term and underestimate it in the long term.
It's small steps.
Small steps. And there's something about having to persist with change. Great. Uwe, I know you weren't in Zurich, but what were your thoughts on the conversation over the last few months?
I can only agree. I mean, I think if I look at it, legislation is one thing, so the governance component is changing so much, so it's burning a lot of time for comp and ben departments. But it's also got changes happening in other areas of HR which are actually impacting on comp and ben. So what I'm seeing a lot, at least in my organization, but also around me, is that the focus is shifting a little bit from how do we pay people to actually how do we develop people. And I think by doing that, that will change compensation in turn, of course. But it means that the topics that we've discussed maybe in Zurich, or that I've also seen then in the actual webcast, they are delayed basically, because first we're focusing on the development side of it, then we will come back. So development means also skills maybe, and then we will come back from that topic to compensation naturally. It's only been a year, so we have there's more time to go, and as you said, change is a long-term component, of course.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we've been running a think tank here today. One of the interesting themes that I've picked up, and I'm hearing in what you just said, is around the fact that comp and ben reward is part of a bigger picture changing. Right, the world of work is changing. Just think about. AI was a topic a year ago, but it's more of a topic now than it was, generative AI. And how that changes how work is done is going to ripple back into what we do. Rainer, what would you like to add? What thoughts have you had on the changing conversation, the evolving conversation?
I want to stay on the topic of AI, and I think building on something you guys discussed in the Zurich meeting, right, and the fact that other HR functions like TA, L&D are further ahead of rewards when it comes to AI usage. But what I've seen in the last year is a lot of activities, first of all, on upskilling. So I see a lot of efforts in the rewards function to upskill ourselves, to see how we can get trained up. But also there is a big push on use cases, right? What are the use cases in rewards where we can apply generative AI? So I think definitely there are delays, but there's also things have happened, I think, since last year.
Great, thank you.
Good point.
So picking up from all of you, one of the themes that's come up is this idea of things moving at different speeds, being distracted is the wrong word, but having to focus on things because of the EU directives, etc. It's a little bit like the Millennium Bug, right? How much effort that put into IT for a number of years, right? It's the same sort of thing. What can we do as rewards professionals to help move our practice, our profession forwards in the medium to longer term? What contributions can we add?
I actually have a lot of faith on the idea of technology. I think that it's interesting that rewards is finally getting attention from developers.
Yes.
AI is helping, but just because there's now legislation that is forcing people to change things that were not done in the past. We need to get better analytics so that we can understand better our pay differentials, for instance, and make sure that our pay equity aligns with the new guidelines that we're seeing from various governments. So that in itself is generating some of the action that we're seeing. One is that we're doing more analytics, not just on pay equity, we're doing more analytics on pay altogether. It's deriving more software to help us do our work, which traditionally had only been done on Excel. And
Yes.
it is also forcing us to link what we do in compensation to other areas
All joined up.
of HR.
Yeah.
Because now pay equity is not just a pay equity problem, it's a recruiting problem. It's also a training and development and promotions problem. So if we are really trying to get the notion of pay equity right, it's not just pay, it's equity as a whole.
Yeah, it's
so
a much
so I
bigger
think
puzzle.
this combination of factors is forcing us to be more analytical about the work we're doing. And that foundation, even though right now it's oriented at perhaps just compliance, but that foundation will help us then do more analysis to things that are
Which
more
gives you
interesting.
data, which means that you can
Yes.
experiment.
Right.
Yeah,
that you
it's
can
a
do more
foundation.
things. So I'm quite optimistic. I think this increase in technology and in AI could be a game changer for compensation, finally.
But one of the things I think, Fermin, to be aware of is that those things can only happen if your basics are in place.
Yeah.
So a thing we can do now, or we should do now, is get the basics in good shape as quick as possible so that we can actually report with accurate data. We can actually have sufficient data elements in our systems, and we have sufficient consistency and simplicity in those systems to use them for other tools like AI to pick up the data and combine it with other sources.
Yes, good point.
Okay, great. So thank you. And the implication there is also not just put in the foundation, but we need to maybe develop some skills to exploit that foundation, to harness that foundation.
Exactly.
Other thoughts that you'd like to add
I
to
can
the
maybe
mix?
add a bit on this actually, because
please.
I actually think we, on top of actually building and looking at the foundations, we have to start to ask the question, what does the customer actually want? And we talked a lot about this, right? And this is what data is trying to tell us, but we sometimes forget, if we think about this newly coined term of employee experience, all we have to do is ask actually. So we need to understand actually what do the employees want, what do the line managers want, and then we have to marry the two actually to come to the best outcome. And I think reward, we are not very skilled at that, at least in my view so far. We know what the line manager wants because we're in touch with the senior managers and we're in touch with the board sometimes. But when it comes to the employees, we think we know, but we actually don't know, really. And I think this is where we have a huge gap. And I think this will drive us forward enormously if this is our focus.
So Uwe, thank you very much. You've just stolen my thunder, because that was going to be my next question. But I applaud your ability to anticipate. So let's move on to this topic. What I was going to say was a lot of second line functions, support functions in businesses, naturally are inward focusing, not just HR, not just reward. You look at IT, you look at legal, it's the same sort of thing. We worry about our own practice, right? And we make assumptions, right? And one of the things we can do is copy from our marketing colleagues, learn from our marketing colleagues and say, what does a customer want? And in this case, the customer is the employee, not necessarily, we take our senior managers as our proxy for the customer. May be wrong. So let's just build on that. And Rainer, maybe you want to pick up on this thread of what should we be doing? How much do we know about what employees actually want?
And look, I think your reference to marketing is actually spot on, right? Because I think if you talk to your marketing teams, to the insights groups in your marketing teams, and you see what the data they are able to generate, right, and the tools they are using, there's a lot in it, which I think we can also use and apply some of these techniques to actually learn more about our employees. Obviously, with the caveat, right, it's employee data, it's sensitive data, so you might not be able to apply one-on-one what they are doing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I think we need to talk to these guys, we need to talk to these teams, and not be shy to start trying out some of the methods and technologies they use.
And it's interesting, this whole marketing mindset, you talked about employee experience, right? The idea of an employee value proposition, right? We have an offer, right? Exactly. And that whole discipline actually could be really instructive for HR in general.
And the marketing people are not confused. Sometimes the clarity we don't have as to what's a client and what's a consumer.
Yeah.
To a marketing department, the client might be the distributor. The client might be the wholesaler, the client might be the intermediary somehow, but the consumer is still the consumer, is the one that uses the product.
Yes.
In our case, the client may still be senior management or management.
Or the organization.
But the consumer is still the employee.
Yes.
Okay. So we should not confuse the two. And when we're talking about the employee experience, we're not talking about the senior management experience. We're talking about the whole
Employees.
experience.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we're
Yes.
talking about the consumers here. Now, what's interesting about the work that we do is that when we talk marketing, the client is usually not the consumer. But in HR, the client is also a consumer.
Yes, a segment.
So I think we should have absolute clarity that in our case, everyone in the organization, not just senior management, is someone that we're trying to provide these services for.
And prospective employees too. Don't forget,
Yes,
we're not
that's
just talking
also a good
employees.
idea.
Because
and,
I was
and
going to
sometimes even former employees.
exactly.
Alums, yeah.
Yeah, because I think on top of actually getting the data, we need to start to partner with talent acquisition much closer to actually understand what comes out in the interviews. What are people asking for?
Yes.
And then potentially not actually joining us, or why are people leaving us actually? And so far, at least from what I've seen, there's huge areas to be exploited there. Because HR does the exit interviews, but we actually need the data to make decisions on how to build compensation frameworks. Or recruitment actually sees talent acquisition. They find the people and say this is why they're not joining, or
talent management as to who gets promoted.
correct. So it goes back to one HR. The whole this one HR thing is becoming a huge thing.
So two big themes here, right? This whole marketing mindset. We're back to one HR and being more integrated, not just, reward into HR and HR into the rest of the organization. It's really interesting, and the role of technology as well within that.
And I always find fascinating that we understand our consumers way more than we understand our employees.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's because we invest a lot more in understanding consumers than employees.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there's different people weighing into our decisions. One of my former CEOs said, Max, they all want to live in the center of Amsterdam, so they need money. So he was very strong in his opinion that money was the thing that mattered. And although we, of course, have to ensure that pay is fair and equal and what have you, people compare to peers and people they find peers, they see as peers, it is indeed much more than only the money that they need. It is all those other elements, and indeed, let's ask the people either through an employee survey or through conjoint analysis or through focus groups, which could give insights, and then we have data again that we can use, and that you can use to sort of counterbalance the strong opinions of those people that decide on how they spend the money. Because in the end, HR is not the one that decides.
But building on that, right, what you guys said, I think realizing that we have already some information, right? We have what you said, like exit interviews, people leaving, we have surveys, we have stay interviews, you name it, right? But I think what we are lacking is this a structured transfer, right? How do we collect this information and how do we transfer it back?
But once you start asking your consumers for what is it you prefer, it creates expectations as well, and that may sometimes be a blocker for asking them. And that's not the right thing to do, I think.
And maybe also we're lacking, if I can draw the conclusion under full circle, the skill actually sometimes to analyze the data that we receive. Because we're getting new data sources into compensation actually that we've never really taken into consideration, and we need to think about how do we use that to actually come up with the right solution for the company.
Well, for the companies is one thing, but for the consumers, individual consumers, those things may be different. And I think at an aggregated level, at a helicopter view, you may say, okay, there's one solution that fits all. The big thing is, of course, that within that large group of employees, there are different consumers with different preferences, different needs, and different ways of how they want to spend the money that they receive and what they receive.
This is very interesting. We're back to marketing, right? Because the idea of segmentation, right? You don't want to personalize necessarily down to the each and every
the
individual.
marketing department would never make the mistake of assuming they know the consumer. They go and they research the consumer. Whereas, back to your point about your manager that said, oh, it's all about money. We think we know our employees, and that's why we don't need to do research, because we already know, but we don't. No more than the marketing department knows the consumer.
You're pointing out one, assumptions, right, and two, projection bias, right? I know, I assume you know what you want, what I want. I want to be in Amsterdam, so you want to be in Amsterdam.
Right. I want money, so you want money.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So great points. Uwe, I want to come back to this idea of a cycle. You mentioned a cycle. It's something. I want to link this back to capability within the reward function. You're suggesting I'm inferring a discipline here of asking questions, going out and asking, gathering data, maybe from sources that are less obvious, right?
Yeah. Like a business insights function, right? I mean,
yes.
This is not so old, that function, actually. I mean, they're also quite young. And I mean, how critical are they now, really, when you think about it? To marketing and to the business. And this is how I look at it as well. I think this is a bit what Comp and Ben needs to become, actually.
That's
because we haven't got this. At least we have to have a skill set like that, or we get this from somewhere about the actual employee and the prospective employee, and of course the employer that left us already. There's a value there we haven't actually really even touched on yet.
And to sort of go around the cycle, right? You ask the question, you gather the data from various sources, you peer at the data, you try and make sense of it, and go, so what does this mean?
Yeah.
Where are my assumptions right and where are they wrong? And therefore, then what should I do about it? Right?
And you test it and you pilot maybe, and then you check, and it's a new way of working, actually, really.
Right. Yeah.
And compensation benefits, from my perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts on?
Well, we've lived on these assumptions for so long that we think they're true. And of course, all loves die hard. But why I'm so optimistic that we now are going to have more data and more people that understand how to deal with data and how we package it, as you say, with the rest of HR, is that should drive us to question, at least test if these assumptions are real or not, and get to better conclusions about what actually works and what doesn't work.
Right, as opposed to what I think works.
It is a common belief, for instance, that, to use an example that we were discussing, that merit drives performance.
Right.
Whereas if you actually look at the data, you may find that merit actually isn't the biggest driver of performance, and perhaps it doesn't do much at all.
Or a lot less than you think.
Or a lot less than you think, and that you should be actually focusing on other things rather than putting all your eggs onto that merit basket as if that was going to be the answer. But we've lived under these assumptions for so long. We all learn these
these truths,
yes, dogma, that for us to get to a new way of thinking will require, I think, a lot of data and a lot of proving to ourselves that some of the things we thought were true.
Not only to ourselves, but also
to senior management.
Preaching to people that need to be converted.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting, right? There's something here about, I don't know whether you call it education or persuasion, but you're talking about the assumptions that your bosses make.
Yes.
And how you shift their thinking on this.
Yes.
I mean, Uwe, you mentioned earlier about the increasing emphasis on development, right? And if you really take that to heart, you can see how it affects potentially some of those assumptions, those closely held beliefs.
Absolutely.
They may actually not be productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So
absolutely.
Very interesting. I want to sort of move us on now. TR2050 is about the future of reward, right? So we looked back on Zurich and talked about why things might maybe not moving as fast as we'd like. We've talked about this whole shift in marketing and thinking about the customer and, hey, let's actually find out what they actually want rather than think we know. But the future of reward. We hear a lot of stuff in general about how coming generations are different from, the younger people have different attitudes and preferences from older people. So in the context of reward and coming generations, younger employees compared to older employees, what do we know or what do we not know about what they might want that's different and therefore how we might need to adapt reward? What are your thoughts on that? Who would like to? Rainer.
I mean, for me, I think the thing coming to my mind first is the topic around the flexibility, right? And it's topics about when is work being done, where is work being done, are you working remote in an office, are you working 4 days a week or 5 days a week, you name it, right? So I think this whole topic around flexibility, to me, that is, I think, what we need to get right, and that's, I think, might be the key expectation. What's also changing, and going back to our assumption, like moving away from the classical career path we are used to, right, the vertical career path, I think that's definitely changing. And then I think another big topic, which we have to get right and our rewards programs need to evolve around it is a topic around psychological safety and mental well-being at the workplace. So for me, I think if I have to rank it, that would be my top 3 developments.
Okay.
I like the idea that a lot of those services and goods that we consume these days, and this is not just a new generation thing, mind you. We are now all used to the fact that, just think of Netflix as an example. It's personalized, it's got AI, it chooses for you. The way you consume Netflix is different than my way of consuming Netflix because we have different tastes, different likes, different this, different that.
It adapts, yeah.
And so in every sort of thing that we are now doing, there is a lot more of that. And the whole marketing world has moved towards personalization of experiences in the way they sell you their products and services. But we are still stuck on the idea that there's only one way that employees should show up to work, and that one way that we're going to pay them. And so
this is a mass manufacturing 20th century mindset,
so,
right? It's like it is
my
here.
biggest thing that's going to change is that the whole of society is moving towards a world where technology enables personalization of experiences in all of the things that we consume and makes it easier to consume them. We as a big collective we, again, it's not a new generation, are now very used to the fact that you order things online and they show up to your house and you don't have to show up at a store. Whereas, 10 years ago, if I wanted something from the supermarket, I had to get out of the house and go to the supermarket.
So it's personalized, it's
convenience,
on demand,
yes,
it's globally available,
yes,
it's
all of
it's a Netflix, right?
And so the idea that we are going to make employees still subscribe to a model that isn't what everything else is going to me is preposterous. We're going to have to move to that level of servicing of our employees. And it's a bit of what he's saying. It's you show up to work when you show up to work, you work from wherever you want to work. And we're going to have to live with a world that will look like that. And we are not prepared with our current compensation models to pay people this way. We haven't figured out what a career that isn't a traditional career should get paid. We haven't figured out what we do if people live in a place different than the city that the office is located.
Or they're a digital nomad.
Or if they're digital. There are many things that we need to figure out that relate to this. So number one on my agenda is this whole notion that this train has already left the station and we are very far behind in catching up to it.
This raises a really interesting point, right? You've got two very powerful forces here heading in opposite directions, right? One, you've got the inertia of big organizations, whose strength is their ability to run things at scale in a particular model, right? The mass market, mass customization, mass
personalization.
Yeah, exactly, right? You've got that. And for the last several decades, we've come in, joined the organization, and we've conformed to the model, right? And you've got to, not just the younger generations, but because of expectations from consumer economy, our expectations are, no. I want it to work the way I want it to work.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Who's going to win? Or is there a third way? How is this tension going to resolve itself?
Well, I like I said, I see the rest of the world moving in that direction, and we're going to have to.
So you think big corporates are going to have to adapt?
I think big corporates will go last. Actually, I think smaller companies will go first. They will change fast.
This is interesting.
The bigger, the slower. And I mean, if you think about it logically, I mean, it makes sense because the cost of failure is so much higher when you're a large organization. And I think what holds us back in reward sometimes, in my mind at least, is this fear of failure. It's the cost of failure. And not so much from the reward professionals, actually also from the management and from the company saying, maybe we have to be conservative and not try something too outrageous because if it fails, that has consequences across the whole workforce. So the bigger you are, the more you will fear change actually when it comes to these reward items.
Yeah, and the bigger the risk to upset your people, etc. I fully agree with what you've said. The thing is, I think currently we do know that the people coming into the organization are much more tech savvy, So they do expect that the interaction is seamless and flawless and what have you. So all these changes may impact that. And we know if there's systems that we use that we work with, that it's not always that flawless.
Yep.
So it's easy to upset people.
Yep.
So we want to have that good interaction. I'm not quite sure if everything is going to be personalized. And I think it's like...
I want to come back to this point.
Yeah, because
Fermin raised it earlier.
That point, work from anywhere. Anywhere where we have an office and where we have a place for you to sit on local conditions. Taking a Swedish pay into India and with all the risk of that, governments make it still very difficult.
We have to figure that out.
We have to figure that out, and that's why it's Total Rewards 2050 and not 2025.
It's not 2025. That's correct.
So it takes time for those things to sort of land, but definitely we need to be much more focused on the customer, how they want to experience things, and how they want to make the changes that they can make currently under the current conditions.
And just on that, and I'm stealing a quote, I forgot, I saw it somewhere, I don't know who said it, but the person was talking about like the Sunday to Monday experience, right? They were saying like Sunday you're home, right? And as you said, everything is at your fingertips, you personalize, and you come to work, right? And
you
things
go
were
back
very
30
different.
years.
So actually, I love that quote a lot.
Yes.
And
it's a very powerful quote. Yes.
I mean, that's very much in the IT functions being, it's like you have these devices, mobile phones, and then suddenly you go back to your corporate laptop and you've gone back several years, right?
Yes. Particularly in HR where they still make you go to the office and sign things on proper
on a piece of paper.
So building on this study, we talked about, we've picked up on this theme of we need to get data, we need to ask customers, we need to challenge our assumptions. I want to pick up on Fermin's point about where might the change come, where might experiments naturally happen. If you're a rewards professional in a big corporate, should you be looking at your fellow big corporates, peers, but also should you be looking at smaller companies, maybe startups, maybe medium, for ideas for what works, and therefore what should I be thinking about trialing?
It's very easy for us with a 20x years in rewards to sort of be guided by that 20 years experience and forget what's out there, what others do. So I think definitely you have to look outside and keep your mind open to what happens. Also look at the smaller companies because they can often be very innovative. So replace lease cars by Uber budgets. Why haven't I thought about that?
It's obvious in retrospect, right?
Yeah, in retrospect, I think, of course, very easy. So these kind of things, it's very important to keep your network and to keep an open view on what's going on in the market.
Great.
And I think that's also like going back to like other functions. That's what companies did when the whole topic around e-commerce, direct to consumer started, right? That's what the big companies did. They looked what other startups doing. How come they are so fast in the market, right? So that's actually, it happened, right? In Corporation City, but maybe to your point, in HR, we are not maybe acting at that same
There's a big danger. You see, marketing people know that the ideas are in smaller companies, but in rewards, in rewards, we go to the salary survey, to our company benchmarks,
our
who
established
are
practices,
just like us. And when we go sell it internally, the first question they're going to ask us is, what are our competitors doing? So if we come in and say, our competitors are still doing the old stuff, but I found some small company that's doing something interesting, so we have a big danger that we don't believe ourselves. And it's interesting, again, to the marketing comparison, that the marketing people all know to look for the disruption usually comes from a small company, not from a big company.
Two things about this. One, it comes from a small player. Two, it comes from outside the sector. So this is interesting. You're actually describing a form of weird peer groupthink.
But that's what we do. What we do is we go to the survey providers, we tell them, this is my peer group, and this is the only people we compare ourselves with, who is everybody that is exactly like us.
So
the likelihood that the innovation is going to happen in one of those benchmark companies that we use is actually quite low. So we need to
look sideways.
Not just that, change the way we think.
Yeah.
And then, like Max says, then we're going to have to change the way senior management thinks, because it's not just us.
Well, I think often the biggest change you'll see where senior management is a strong advocator of HR topics, of the reward topics. So where they either had a stance in HR during their career, or they've worked very closely and have seen it happening in another company, what impact a reward could have. So it works well if you have that sponsorship indeed.
Great.
And maybe to build on that, I mean, because now we're talking about changing actually a mindset, right? And changing the mindset in the reward function. It's actually looking at it and changing a mindset from protecting the company. That I have to make sure that we have the governance right, and this is a protective thing. It's a you know, I don't want to change because.
Yeah.
And we need to change that to, okay, there's an opportunity here, and what's the value in the opportunity?
It's a reframe.
And this is what I like about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you talk of an innovative company, that's actually what players do when you have large established companies and they're really looking for someone to disrupt. They look for the entrepreneur and bring them in to try and remind them what it's like to actually run something without processes, without policies.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we have to do the same in reward. We have to learn a bit from that in the reward and actually say, not to give away all the reward frameworks and the governance, right? Then they would probably sack us all. But it's more around actually getting an idea from that, piloting it, seeing how we scale this into an organization. That is where the change will come from, actually, I think.
What Uwe, I think you're pointing to is this interesting, right? We have potential change, potential uncertainty, potential disruption. You may not be able to change that, but what you can change is, do you view that as a threat, which I need to protect my organization again, or do I see opportunity?
Exactly.
Right, and it's a very psychologically different response.
Exactly.
Right.
But reward is psychology, right? If you think about
Totally.
it. I mean, it's all about psychology.
Is the business we're in, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's motivation of some sort,
But we forget that sometimes, right? We think of the motivation, but you need to think of the whole of psychology, actually, of how this works.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes it's difficult. For example, if payroll pays out pay a couple of hours later than expected, you have the first people calling already, where's my salary? So you need to find a way of dealing with that as well. Say, hey, guys, we are experimenting. It may take some time to correct or to repair.
So you start small, right?
Start small.
Start small, manage
in a
your
safe
risk.
environment.
But it's interesting, you did point out, the act of asking raises expectations. So this is continual process of managing expectations through communication, both directions.
In both directions, indeed. People need to understand that we are experimenting for the greater good of things.
Correct.
And we need to be careful with not too much experimenting so that we mess up people's lives.
Not all at once, at least.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to get better at change management.
Yes.
And most people are not. We haven't had change in so long.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Absolutely.
So we started this discussion by looking back at Zurich. And one of the things Fermin and Max, both of you have pointed to, is this, and in fact, Rainer as well, you talked about the personalization and how the sentiment on that conversation over the last 14 months has changed. So I want to come back to it and get your thoughts on what's changed. Let's dig into that a little bit. What's your sense on this? And Fermin, may I start with you?
The change to personalized pay is big. It actually disrupts every single notion that we have about how we do pay, because it does away with the notion of jobs, and therefore job evaluations, job architecture, salary surveys, the way we understand them, also kind of goes by the wayside. The whole notion of pay equity becomes more complicated.
Yeah.
Then there's the whole technology behind it. It also implies a big implication is that we actually have to ask employees what it is they want to sort of get their input, which is something, again, that rewards people are not known to do.
A little bit alien. Yeah.
So as a concept, people hear it and they go, oh yeah, great idea. And then you start thinking through, what will it take to get from this to that? And then you realize that you have to break so many things, convince so many people, and that there's actually a few sort of slippery rocks along the way that you're not sure about. And because there are so few examples out there that people can say, because we're also very good at benchmarking. So I want to try something new, but let me find out who's done it before.
Yeah.
We do that a lot. So I think it's a combination of all of that. I think the idea is beginning to, okay, I'm optimistic. So I think what has happened is people are now hearing it and going, oh, okay, what is it going to take? And now they realize that it's a pretty idea that will take a lot of work.
Yeah.
And perhaps I can do some other things. And by the way, transparency is now the priority.
I was going to say new directive.
There's new toys to play with, new technologies. So let me put that on hold while I do some other stuff and wait for other people to do personalization so I can benchmark.
Right. Max.
I think there's for me there's some scale of personalization. So you can go all the way and say people, you decide, or
You can have anything.
You can have anything.
Yep.
Trade variable pay for base, trade base for variable, or you can take smaller steps and say, hey, there is some sort of personalization. You can get more base if you live close to the office, and for example, you get your lease car paid out as a lump sum amount rather than you have to take this lease car.
Right.
You need more days off, fine. You can sell some, you buy some additional days. You want save for pension, put some of those holidays that you have left over because you don't get to spend them, put them in your pension rather than have them paid out. So that sort of personalization, I think that helps people to mold their package, their basic package that we offer them, and that is comparable for the pay transparency, to mold that package to their lifestyle and where they are in life. But it doesn't give it all open.
Actually, I think that's a very good point. That when we talk personalization, we shouldn't just assume that there's only one way to do personalization.
Yes.
Because then we fall into the same trap that we always fall, that there's only one way to do things.
Yeah.
So Max makes a very good point, which is that there's probably various degrees in which you can adjust pay to employee needs. And perhaps these examples are good, or the example that you may decide one size doesn't have to fit all, and then you can create different pay models for different areas of the organization.
Segments.
Segment by, say, the ones where the KPIs are easier, like marketing, and the ones, so you can have more variable pay, but the ones where the KPIs are more difficult, like internal audit, then perhaps you don't want to have as much. Or the ones where having a company-based incentive, like governance, may not be a good idea. So you may actually adjust by
area, type, function,
segmentation, or the notion that perhaps what we have is personas, like we do with benefits, and so what you have is two
Another
or three.
marketing idea, by the way, but both the segments and the personas. Interesting.
And so you then create 2 or 3 different pay approaches that's the only choice that you give. So it's either this or that. So there's perhaps many ways in between in which you can start the process of getting more adjusted to employee needs and employee wants. And again, it's the same thing as companies do. Companies all ask consumers, what exactly do you want? And it turns out that customers want all kinds of different things, but they have to decide on which products they're actually going to make. And so the decision on which product you make takes into account everything the consumers tell you, but it may not be that is exactly the product that I wanted. It's the product that most resembles what I want.
And in how many colors do I make it?
Exactly.
And in what markets do I distribute?
And I mean, we reflected on this earlier today, right? If you offer too much choice, the consumer, in this case the employee, may actually choose nothing because it's too aversive, right? Rainer, your thoughts on this?
I mean, firstly, I think personalization can be a key differentiator, right? If you to attract talent, if you go that path. I think the learning for me a bit in the discussion this morning was going back to what you said, the one HR, right? So I think it cannot be reward only. So we need to look at it from a holistic HR view, right? And I think what we also discussed going into that, it requires some level of simplification in some of the tools we do to make it administrable, right? You can do it, but then we are also adding maybe complexity in other areas, like if you want to experiment with skills pay or anything, right? So you might go in one direction of simplification while you're adding more complexity on the other side, right? So how do you bring these together? That I think that was a bit, when you ask about, there was excitement maybe a year ago and it was a bit more critical today. I think to me that were the discussions which maybe thought, okay, it's good, right? But let's maybe take a step back and think it through. Right?
This idea of simplifying in some places and complicating in others is a really interesting one, because of course you've got to figure out where it's worth making it things more complicated, because there's some value to employees or to someone. Really interesting idea. Great, thanks. Uwe.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, building on what everyone said, I think you have to cut the elephant into pieces, actually. I think what we're all scared of in individualizing reward, actually, is the end state, right? Because it looks very complicated. But I think it's a journey, actually. And I think we said this morning, it's a philosophy, actually, that you have to embrace. But then how do you get to that and over how many years? But you have to make a start. And I think we will be forced to make a start, not in reward. It'll actually come from one HR. It'll come through maybe development or through skills or through employees actually asking us.
It's going to be the future of work, actually, isn't it?
Exactly. That will
it'll ripple through.
So we should be aware of it, and then we should start to think about it and then see how do we bring this into our organization so it works.
My mind is going to come from recruiting, because it's the employees that we're trying to hire that are going to say, oh, but this is what I would like.
Exactly, but I would like to have this.
I think this is where we're going. In fact, we do a lot of customization already with the gig workforce. Because we hire different gig on different contracts for different reasons. So we don't think too much about that, but we're already doing it. The more our workforce becomes part-time or gig, the more we're going to have to embrace different models.
Yep.
Yes.
Agree.
Yeah, I haven't figured the gig ones out yet.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the next.
Another thing to talk about.
Yes.
Great. Hey, look, thank you so much. It's been a lovely discussion, really, really stimulating and entertaining. I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.